Well, maybe I should spend more time pressing my face to your face and whispering sweet nothings, and then I would have known.
Books. Books. Books.
Hello, and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that prefers its lesbians traditional, that is, ravenous, and the stuff of myth. I am your host, Grace Todd. I am your host, Grace. Jesus Christ.
Get it together, woman.
I can't. This is what happens every time you should hear the raw file from when you and I were doing this before, because I can't function. I am your host, Grace Todd, book gremlin and literary bisexual. And with me today is friend of the pod, Galen Canham. Galen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Grace. I am Galen. I am a good friend of yours, as you well know.
This is news to me. Where the fuck did you come from? Who are you?
Newsflash.
Someone help me. What do you do, Galen? What is your position in the world? Did you spring fully formed from a succubus 10 minutes ago?
I ask myself this all the time. What is my position in the world? I don't know. I am just, a local gal about town. I'm a local bartender. Spend most of my time doing that or trying not to fall asleep.
Chilling drinks, reading books.
Yep. Not as many as I like to read, but this has been good motivation to get through at least one lately.
And I'm very excited about it. What are you going to share with us today?
So today I am sharing with you Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan, Fanu. The edition that I have is one that came out in 2019, edited by the delightful Carmen Maria Machado, who we are both big fans of.
Love her.
And frankly, probably the ideal person to do this edition as a queer horror writer. Makes a lot of sense that she would be invested in a very queer vampire novel from the 1800s. Yeah, so she edited this one, came out in 2019. The book itself came out in 1872.
Okay.
Precursor to Dracula by, I think, 17 years thereabouts. And supposedly an inspiration or something of that sort for Bram Stoker. So she did this edition. There are a lot of footnotes in here by her, which are always really fun. I'm not going to get deeply into those just because there's enough to talk about with the book, but there's a few that are really funny that I'll be talking about.
Love a good footnote.
One of the comments that she made in her introduction that just made me, the note I have in my book just says, LOL. The text is edited to reflect a more modern grammatical sensibility where necessary. There are also places where your faithful editor has done her best to interrupt Fanu's passionate and unrequited love affair with unnecessary commas.
Honestly, same.
And when I was going back after I did the initial read and then was going back through to take notes and everything, I noticed that again and then went back, was looking at some of the quotes I had pulled and I was like, oh wow, there are so many commas in here.
Shameful confession, I use commas in my own writing like a Victorian. I once was editing a book manuscript and sent it off to the proofreader and got it back from the proofreader with a comment being like, this author and their commas, oh my God. And I was like, ooh, I put some of those in there.
Oh yeah, that's so crazy that they used so many of them.
Oh no, I have a problem.
I mean, they're a useful device.
To my mind, you put them where you want people to breathe.
Yeah.
In their heads.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's how that works.
Uh-huh. Yep. Well. Comma abuse aside, I have never read Carmilla, and I am aware that it's a big influence on many other works, and I know that it's subversive, but I'm very excited to hear the story.
Yeah, I had actually never heard of it. I picked it up. I think you and I were at Barnes & Noble around your birthday book shopping. I know we were book shopping together. I'm pretty sure it was like, it's my birthday, let's go look at books. I was like, oh, let's do it.
I can't imagine that's shocking to me.
Wild turn of events. And I saw the cover and I was like, oh, that's a really cool picture. And then I saw edited by Carmen Maria Machado and I was like, fascinating. And I picked it up and I was like, really cool. And you're like, oh yeah, that's a famous book. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to buy it.
And now we are here.
Yes. And that was in February and I've only this month finished reading it for the first time.
Hey man, look, I know too many people who are embarrassed about being kind of slow readers, but every single person I know who is slightly bashful about being a slow reader also retains what they read so much better than I could ever dream of. And I gotta say, man, even if it takes you 6 months to get through a book, if you are digesting that book, good on you.
Yeah, no, and this one is not too long, and it was a fun read. Like it was pretty easy to get through once I actually like sat down and was like, read this book, and I was my brain was like, okay, we're ready, let's do it.
It is time.
Yes. But yeah, it's written in the 1870s. It starts out with an introduction from Fanu that was basically like, these are letters I found between real people written to each other, and I'm just presenting them here for you. It's not written like an epistolary novel where it's not actually letter from letter two. It's just like one narrative from the narrator, Laura, who is the kind of protagonist in this whole book. So it's just her telling this whole story, but supposedly within letter form to a gentleman named Dr. Hesselius, who actually makes appearances in a couple other short stories by Fanu, which is fascinating. Haven't read them yet, but he has a whole bunch of other short stories. This was featured in a collection of one of them. Started out as a serial series, a series of stories published in a London literary magazine in like 1871 to 1872, and then it was published on its own as a book in 1872.
Oh, cool. I love a good in-universe character.
Yeah.
And I love a good epistolary novel.
I do too.
Dracula's an epistolary novel.
I don't think I remember that. That's very nifty. And there's a lot of speculation that Bram Stoker was heavily influenced by this book.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because Dracula is, I can't remember if it's entirely epistolary or just heavily epistolary, but it's mostly letters.
Yeah.
So I guess that's just funny to like the vampire genre. It's all letters.
Yeah. Everyone's like, these were real.
One of my favorite things is the Victorian conceit of the fake framing device. And I kind of wish people did that more often.
It's fun.
Yeah. The closest modern equivalent I can think of is like the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
We should do that more in fiction. Bring it back, y'all. It's time.
And well, and it like paranormal activity did that as well.
Yeah.
Like, is this a feature prominently in like horror, sci-fi? This is a way to present some kind of crazy out of hand ideas in a way that makes it a little more palatable. No, I'm just letting you know about the story that someone told me. Like, this isn't just fiction.
Contemporarily, it definitely makes things scarier. I also, in the Victorian era, it was a great way to distance yourself from potentially scandalous or what's the word I'm looking for? Not inappropriate or deviant.
Yeah, deviant. I was going to say lurid, but yeah.
Yeah, like it's a great way to distance yourself from like scandalous or potentially deviant content, because then you're like, I didn't make this up.
Yeah.
This didn't come out of my diseased little brain.
Yeah.
This came out of someone else's diseased little brain, and all I'm doing is relaying it along to you, the reader. And I am just as shocked as you are that all of these lesbians are also vampires.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, tell me the story. Tell me the story of Carmilla.
I will. So, like I said, written in 1872, supposedly Laura, the protagonist, is telling the story, takes place when she's 19, is telling the story 10 years later. So, I don't know, happened in the 1860s, supposedly. It takes place in Styria, which is a region of Austria, southeast of Austria.
Is it a real place, or did they make it up for the book?
It is actually a real place.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I don't know if right now geographically it is still considered Styria. I can't remember, but it is actually a place. It starts out with a description of a kind of lonely but loving existence of Laura and her father living in this manor house in kind of the woods of Styria, with a few like governess type characters. They refer to them in the book as Madame and Mademoiselle.
Ooh.
They give their full names as well, but that's generally just how they are referred to throughout the books. And then there's an aside in there about like she's describing their kind of little household, and she's like, oh, I'm not counting all of the staff. It's just us. And it's like, okay, yeah.
It's just us for the real humans.
Yes.
And then the staff who are less than people.
Yep. So yeah, her dad is retired from the Austrian service, and it's just her and her father. Her mom had died previously, so it's just them living in this little house. I love the description. We talked last time when we got together to podcast about my love of Gothic architecture and things of such, and so this little description of where they live up front. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat is stocked with perch and sailed over by many swans. On its surface float white fleets of water lilies. Over all this, the manor house shows its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right, a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. So they really kind of paint a very pretty but isolated picture of what their household is like.
It sounds lovely.
Yeah. So
I want to go to there.
I want to go there too. Yeah. So it just kind of starts out with how they're living. It's mainly just them. She clearly doesn't have a lot of friends because they live in the middle of nowhere in Austria in the 1870s, 60s, and it's hard to have a casual visitor pop over every once in a while.
You're not just texting your besties from the tower.
Yeah. The nearest... Yeah, so the nearest inhabited village is miles and miles away. But then she says, I have said the nearest inhabited village because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say in the direction of General Spielsdorf's manor house. We'll get to Spielsdorf later. A ruined village. There sits a quaint, roofless little church, in the aisle of which are the moldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein. Now extinct, they once owned the desolate chateau which overlooks the silent ruins of the town from the thick of the forest. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there's a legend which I shall relate to you another time. Deep foreshadowing that will come very relevant later in the story.
I was going to say, what's a sign that everything is going to be fine and nothing is going to go wrong is when you live alone with just your father and some weird governesses in the middle of the woods, and the closest inhabited place to you is not inhabited but abandoned and full of corpses. That is a great sign. This is going to be a fantastic rom-com. Can't wait.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So yeah, it kind of starts out, they're just living in their house. She's kind of talking about living alone and the governesses that she lives with and yada, yada, yada. The first kind of detail of story that they get into, the first occurrence in my life, which produced a terrible impression on my mind, is one of the very earliest incidents I can recollect. So she's getting into this kind of early sort of nightmare she had. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales, of the lore that makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of a guttering candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, I imagined, neglected, and I began to whimper in preparation from a burst of sobs. So she wakes up in the middle of the night, has this terror, and she's like, I'm a logical, sane person. I'm not afraid of ghosts. It's kind of setting up that she's not prone to these flights of fancy and all of that jazz. It was only then that I saw the solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. The young lady was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed. She drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately soothed and fell asleep again. This was the sensation that woke me, as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment. I cried loudly. The lady started back, her eyes fixed on me, then slipped down upon the floor and, I thought, hid herself under the bed. So this is a recollection that happens when she's 6, so approximately 12, 13 years prior to when this story is taking place. She screams, she yells, the nurses come to look, they can't find anything, and they're like, it's okay, baby girl, go to sleep, you had a bad dream. Sticks in her mind for a long time.
I can't imagine why.
A nursemaid sits up with her all night. Then we kind of get into the present day. She is just hanging out with her dad, living their life. They were supposed to have that General Spielsdorf come visit them. He had a young daughter, well, a ward of his, but he loved her like a daughter, so she was basically his daughter. He was supposed to be bringing his daughter Bertha to come stay for a visit. Laura and Bertha had never met before, and she was really excited to have a girlfriend come stay with her. And she was like, friends, yay.
Aww.
I'm going to have a companion. Tragedy strikes. That does not happen. Bertha dies.
Oh, bummer for Bertha. Didn't even make it on screen before she was shuffled off stage left.
Yeah, and her dad has a comment about well, I'm glad you guys never made friends because she's dead now. I just got a letter from the general. And she's like, oh, fuck, I thought... I was really looking forward to that visit, but now she's dead.
I thought I was going to have a friend.
Yeah, so that kind of happens, and the general sends a very kind of enigmatic emotional. He's distraught about the birth of his daughter, was like planning on coming to visit his old friend. So he sends this whole letter. I've lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. I'm not going to read you the whole letter, but a few lines from it. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all.
Oh.
And then a little later, I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster.
Oh.
I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. And then blah, blah, blah. I'm really upset. This is terrible. But basically, he's like, I'm too distracted to write right now. I'm going to try to recover. I am going to look into some stuff. I'll be in touch. Hopefully I'll see you again soon. But I'm freaking out. Can't talk right now, but I won't be coming for the visit.
I can't help but notice that the monster in question is studiously not gendered in that letter right there.
Yeah, we'll get into that. So then they're like, oh, we're sad. But then I'm just like, let's go for a nice walk in the moonlight. No, that's a bummer. We'll get back to this.
Bummer about my almost friend's tragic death. You know what sounds great? Walking alone in the woods at night.
Yeah, so it was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered in the gloaming, speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences I had just read. Moon's shining brightly. It's a beautiful night. They met Madame and Mademoiselle out, who go on a walk with them. So they're all kind of wandering around, checking out the land, looking at the drawbridge, and they're talking about the moon. The effect of the full moon in such a state of brilliancy was manifold. It acted on dreams, it acted on lunacy, it acted on nervous people. It had marvelous physical influences connected with life. Mademoiselle related that her cousin, who was a maid on a merchant ship, once took a nap on deck on such a night, laying on his back with his face full in the light of the moon. He woke after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek with his features horribly drawn to one side. His countenance had never quite recovered its equilibrium, which to me sounds like a stroke.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's a stroke is what that is.
So sleeping in the moonlight gives you strokes.
Yes. And that
Thanks.
is like...
Good to know.
Yeah, that is 100% just a stroke. They've got death on the mind. They're all just kind of talking about all this weird, dark stuff.
In true Victorian fashion, just swapping horrifying death stories.
Yup. So they're out on this walk talking about death and all that fun stuff. And a carriage goes by that they don't recognize, but it clearly is someone that's high station. It's nice. They've got livery and all that stuff. They've got people accompanying them. Yeah. And it crashes. It hits a root in the ground or something, and it goes down. Everyone's like, oh no. So they go up, and this woman comes out, again, clearly of high station, draped in black velvet, very dramatic looking. So they talk a little bit, and she's basically like, I'm on an urgent matter, and I have to get this urgent family thing I can't explain, and I have to rush there. Her daughter has collapsed or fainted or something of that ilk, and they kind of carry her out, lay her down. Mom is freaking out. She's like, I have to go on this urgent family matter. She's clearly in no state to travel. This is I have to go right now. I cannot wait. Can you watch my daughter? And they're like, okay, stranger. Sure. Leave your child with us.
If there's one thing I love, it's handing my progeny off to strangers in the woods.
Yeah. So her daughter, she's not actually a child. She's about the same age as Laura. So they're both late teens. Laura hasn't really gotten a good look at this girl yet or anything. She's kind of fainted, turned away from her, but the woman rushes off. They fix the wheel on the carriage. She goes off on her journey. They bring the fainted lady back to their manor house.
Does this mean Laura finally gets a friend?
Yes.
Ooh.
They get her back to the house. They get her situated in one of their very stately extra rooms in their vast manor house. There's a million of them. Have some nurses attend to her, have the Madame or Mademoiselle sit and watch her overnight. And so finally at the next day, and Laura's like, can I go meet her, please? I am so curious. I am so lonely. Let me go meet this person. Our visitor lay in one of the handsomest rooms in the manor house. It was perhaps a little stately. There was a somber piece of tapestry opposite the foot of the bed representing Cleopatra with the asps to her bosom.
Oh, how nice.
So this is where they have her settled up.
What a thing to wake up to.
Well, we'll get into that. It might not be as upsetting for her as it would be for anyone else.
I see.
Yeah. So she finally gets in there. Everyone is like, she's so beautiful and her voice is so nice. And she's just this gorgeous, gorgeous woman.
And she's definitely just a normal run-of-the-mill human girl.
Huh.
Got it.
Yeah. And totally normal.
They're going to be best friends.
I mean, they do become very good friends, but with a lot of undertones. So she finally goes in to meet her. She's well enough to receive visitors. What was it that, as I reached her bedside and began my greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil from her? I will tell you. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory and on which I had for so many years so often ruminated with horror. It was pretty, even beautiful, and wore the same melancholy expression as when I first beheld it. Her countenance kindled into me a strange, fixed smile of recognition. There was a silence of fully a minute, and then at length she spoke. I could not. "How wonderful!" she exclaimed. 12 years ago, I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since.
Gasp!
So, 12 years ago, they dreamt of each other in various horrible scenarios.
What a twist!
Yeah, so they're telling each other the visions that they had, which line up very well. And then here we get one of our first, queer-coded kind of... There's a lot of arduous descriptions of each other and everything. The girl, the visitor, says to Laura, as part of the dream that she had about her 12 years ago, "Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms about you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was aroused by a cry. You were sitting up and screaming. I was frightened and slipped down upon the ground and, it seemed to me, lost consciousness for a moment. When I came to myself, I was again in my nursery at home. Your face I have never forgotten since. I could not be misled by mere resemblance. You are the lady I saw."
Ooh.
And then Laura says that she felt rather unaccountably drawn towards the beautiful stranger. I did feel, as she said, drawn towards her, but there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She interested and won me. She was so beautiful and it's so indescribably engaging.
Just heterosexually dreaming about women climbing into my bed.
Historians said they were best friends. Her lifelong roommate.
Just pals. Just a couple of gal pals.
But all that to say, they're immediately drawn to each other, whether it's, supernatural or what. They're immediately like, yeah, this girl, tight, I'm into it. They become really fast friends. They immediately are just drawn to each other, as it said, spending all of their time together, stroking each other's hair, holding each other around the waist.
Very heterosexually.
Giving each other kisses on the cheek. All of those normal things that friends do all the time. I have in my notes, they become fast friends, parentheses, lots of homoerotic undertones. Shocking.
I mean, it's funny though, like, and my perspective is a little off because I was an unrealized baby queer person experiencing longing and not knowing it. Mm-hmm. But especially when you're quite young, there's a lot of murkiness, I feel like, to especially like teen girls in terms of there's a lot of very platonic touchy and there's a lot of stuff that kind of veers into a little, nascently homoerotic touchy.
Yeah, like we're both very physically affectionate people, and I have girlfriends that I like kiss on the cheek every time I see them, and like I was jokingly smacking her ass earlier today. Like never, neither of us would ever do that. But like, yeah, that is a thing I've known about every girlfriend I've had. We're all just touchy, huggy, boo boo boo. I'm just gonna fiddle with your hair, blah 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 blah. But also like, there's way more queer people out there than I think those people even realize. So.
That is true. But yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity there,
truly,
or there can be.
Yeah.
So all right, they've glommed onto each other.
They've glommed onto each other. They've become quick friends, into each other's friendship, having great time, great conversations. But there are also occasional kind of outbursts from. So Carmilla, this is Carmilla. If I haven't said that already.
I thought you were withholding it for like a reason.
No.
You just kept being like the girl, and I was like, is this going to be the surprise?
Well, I think at this point they've only just now like said her name. Yeah, I think we're 35 pages in, and I'm pretty sure this is the first time in which they actually say that her name is Carmilla. But yeah, so they're friends, but Carmilla's very withholding about her history and isn't really like giving out details about her past or anything like that. But they're still getting into all these random conversations and blah, blah, blah. But then also, it says, there was a coldness, it seemed to me, beyond her years in her smiling, melancholy, persistent refusal to afford me the least ray of light.
Maybe it's because her mom keeps abandoning her in the woods with strangers when she's unconscious.
Well, very possibly. A little bit farther on, she placed her pretty arms about my neck, drew me to her, and lay her cheek to mine, murmuring with her lips near my ear, "Dearest, your little heart is wounded. Do not think me cruel because I obey the irresistible law of my strength and weakness. If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours. In the rapture of my enormous humiliation, I live in your warm life, and you shall die, sweetly die, into mine."
Okay, mommy.
Yeah. Yup.
I mean,
I cannot help it as I draw near to you. You in your turn will draw near to others and learn the rapture of that cruelty which yet is love.
Oh no.
So for a while seek to know no more of me and mine, but trust me with all your loving spirit. It's like super cash.
I mean, if a woman walked up to me in a bar and started murmuring that into my ear, I would probably follow her home.
Yeah.
Unquestioningly. Just like, yeah, okay. That's fine.
And when she had spoken such a rhapsody, she would press me more closely in her trembling embrace and lay soft kisses upon my cheek.
Okay.
Yeah. And so she's like, I'm not going to give you more information, but I love you so much. It's like, girl, chill. All right.
You're like, that's fine. It's okay.
So it kind of goes on like this. Every third page, I have stuff underlined in here. I'm not going to go read the whole thing, but she would gaze in my face with languid and burning eyes, breathing so fast that her dress rose and fell with the tumultuous respiration. It was like the ardor of a lover. It embarrassed me. It was hateful and yet overpowering. There's a lot of this and a lot of like hot lips traveling along my cheek and kisses. So it's just, there's just so much of that. It's just everywhere.
I'm really impressed by how subtle all of this is.
It's very subtle.
Yeah.
So all this is going on. They're, super subconsciously horny for each other. But Carmilla's been sort of absorbed into their household. She's there with them all the time. They're hanging out. They're just living life. She's a little they spend all of their waking hours together, but Carmilla's hours of waking are a little bit different than everyone else's in the house. It's not like she's only out at night, but there's a lot of comments about her, like, they'll do their coffee and chocolate in the morning. Like Carmilla will show up later in the afternoon. She always keeps her door locked from the inside at night. And because she's, quote, afraid of robbers,
Sure.
So she locks herself in at night, will appear kind of later in the afternoon.
She sleeps in late like a harlot.
Sleeps in very late. Doesn't tend to join them for meals. They do their evening prayers, but she's like, no, I'm good. Not really going to sit around for that one.
I'm fine on the God and Jesus front.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's just like not my bag.
Oh my God, I really appreciate the invitation, but I'm just going to have to say no, thank you.
Yeah, so she's just not showing up for that kind of stuff. Amongst all of this, you're sort of hearing these talks of mysterious deaths that are going on in the surrounding area. Again, the subtlety.
Huh.
It's mostly,
I wonder.
It's mostly peasants that are passing away in the surrounding areas, but then also the death of Bertha Pryor was one in these. It's so weird. These people are dying. They're succumbing to the sickness, fading out, and then like passing away. And it's usually happening within a couple of days. And everyone's kind of like amongst Laura and Carmilla's budding friendship. And Laura's dad is just like, cool, new girl in the house. This is tight. We're loving it. This is great. I'm just kind of living my life. And Laura's like, I'm having all of these feelings. Oh my God. And Carmilla's like, hello, beautiful. I'm here.
I realize that this is a story that birthed a genre. And that's why these beats feel so predictable to us. But it is just really funny when it's like, yeah, she stays up late and she's not super into Jesus and she doesn't really eat anything. And also the peasants just keep dropping like flies. It's so strange. I can't imagine what connects these things.
Yeah. As someone who, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer is one of my favorite TV shows. I
should have known we would wind up here
so many times. Of course, Buffy is going to come into this conversation. Are you kidding me? There's just so many little beats from that I keep thinking of. The truly awful but like entertaining to watch Van Helsing series, which aesthetically has a lot in common with this. There's just so many pieces of media playing through my mind when I was reading through all of this.
Like, oh, I see where they got that.
Yeah, so they're, spending a lot of time going on long walks throughout the area. And one of these long walks, there's a funeral procession for one of the peasants that has passed away. And the people are singing a hymn. Carmilla is unimpressed. She is not a fan of hymns, turns out.
Again, I am shocked.
Her face underwent a change that alarmed and even terrified me for a moment. It darkened and became horribly livid. Her teeth and hands were clenched, and she frowned and compressed her lips while she stared down upon the ground at her feet.
I'm picking up that she might not be super into religion.
It's not her fave. She is up and down. Her emotions all over the place. Sometimes she's really cold. Sometimes she's extremely loving. It's, Laura's completely infatuated, but also very confused. And then Carmilla will just come in and be like, I love you. You're so beautiful. And you're such a good friend. And kissy, kissy, kissy. And Laura's like, no, okay.
Typical over-emotional woman.
Truly. So there's a hunchbacked wanderer who appears from time to time at their area, just kind of selling his wares and charms. And, you know, the myth of the vampire has already existed by this point. It's something that's been around for like centuries. It pops up in a lot of different cultures. So the wanderer is selling charms against vampires. And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll buy one. One of the things he says, and so keep in mind, Carmilla has consistently been described as gorgeous. She's a babe. Everyone is like, damn, this girl looks good. We're into it.
Which means in the Victorian era, she looks like she has tuberculosis.
Yeah, well, and yes, yeah. There's like, you know, descriptions of her beautiful features and her gorgeous long silky flowing hair and all of this stuff. Somehow this particular aspect doesn't come up in the description until the wanderer comes in. So they're just chatting with him. Laura knows him. He comes through every once in a while, and he's just an entertaining guy that they'll run into and be like, oh, hey, it's that guy again. Cool. He's selling weird shit. Has got these weird figurines and everything. So he's talking to them. Carmilla and Laura are out in the courtyard chatting with him. And he notices that she has very sharp and pointy teeth.
Oh.
Which again has never come up in any of the descriptions of her. And she's constantly like smiling and like kissing and blah, 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 blah. Your noble friend, the young lady at your right, has the sharpest tooth. Long, thin, pointed, like an awl, like a needle. Ha ha. With my sharp and long sight, as I look up, I have seen it distinctly. Now, if it happens to hurt the young lady, and I think it must, here I am, or here am I. Here are my file, my punch, my nippers. I will make it round and blunt, if her ladyship pleases. No longer the tooth of a fish, but of a beautiful young lady, such as she is. Hey, is the young lady displeased? Have I been too bold? Have I offended her? Listener, he did offend her.
That's one might call a bit of a fang you've got there. Would you like some assistance with that? You must catch that on yourself a lot.
Yeah. And again, it's so funny to me that just in all of the descriptions are from all of the other people, no one deigns to mention that, like, man, this bitch's teeth are fucking weird. Like, never comes up at all.
Well, you know, that's the manners of the upper class versus the merchant class, right? You know?
Yeah.
Objectively, if you are living in a manor house and you are that kind of old money, your family is very inbred already by the Victorian era. So you just get used to not mentioning these things.
Yeah, that's very true.
You know, a bit of a fang, a Habsburg chin, whatever.
Yeah. Delightful. But yeah, so she's just like, how dare you? He kind of goes off on his merry way.
He's like, I told this lady she had fucked up teeth and offered to fix them, and she got real mad.
Yeah.
Does he turn up dead later?
No, he never shows up again, and they never mention the teeth again. It never comes up again.
In my head, she like waited until the fall of darkness, climbed out a window, hunted him down, and ate him in the woods, and that's why he never turned up again.
Yeah. So they're still just living their life. More peasant women are dying.
I mean, they're barely people, right?
Yeah. I will give it, like, Laura and her father, they're bummed about this situation. They don't like it at all.
They're concerned.
Yeah, my father was out of sorts that evening. He told us that there had been another case very similar to the two fatal ones that had recently occurred. The sister of a young peasant on his estate only a mile away was very ill. She had been, as she described it, attacked very nearly in the same way as the others and was now slowly but steadily declining.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah, but then he's like, all this is strictly referable to natural causes. These poor people infect one another with their superstitions and so repeat in imagination the images of terror that have infested their neighbors. He's like,
yep, there we go.
These hysterical women.
There's the Victorian class consciousness I was expecting.
Yep.
These damn stupid pores.
Yeah, I was like, we're in God's hands. He'll take care of us.
The peasant women are dying of hysteria.
Yeah, so they're all talking about this, and the doctors are coming into town. They're going to go take a look at everything, kind of, you know, just check the situation out. Carmilla saying, doctors never did me any good. Then you have been ill, I asked? More ill than you ever were, she answered. Ooh. Long ago? Yes, a long time. I suffered from this very illness, but I forget all except my pain and weaknesses. And these were not so bad as are suffered in other diseases. And Laura says, you were very young then? I dare say, let us talk no more of it. You would not wound a friend. She looked languidly in my eyes, passed her arm around my waist lovingly, and led me out of the room. My father busied himself over some papers near the window.
This is such a good portrayal of a hot, problematic lady. Every time you start to notice something, being like, like I'm gonna touch you.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%.
Don't worry about it. We don't need to talk about that. Have I told you how pretty you are lately?
Yeah. And so the doctor comes and talks to the dad, and you can tell they're very much talking about vampires because after the dad and the doctor go off into his office for a while, they're chatting, they come out together and blah, blah, blah. And Papa says, well, I do wonder at a wise man like you, what do you say to hippogriffs and dragons? Ha ha ha. You crazy man and your supernatural theories. It couldn't be vampires.
One of my favorite characters in the sort of vampire gothic, horror genre is the supremely overconfident, ebullient, middle-aged man who's just like, this is fine.
Yeah.
Especially if he's English.
Yes. Yeah. So all that's going on. They're like, oh, everything's fine. And she didn't really hear what they were saying in the office. She just heard that one comment. And she's like, I did not then know what the doctor had been broaching, but I think I guess it now.
I think I've put 2 and 2 together in retrospect.
Yeah. Like I said, they live a pretty lonely existence compared to someone who lives in a city out in this estate. But, they're not banished in the middle of nowhere. They get people that travel through. There's, the wanderer, like that kind of stuff. They get people that will just randomly pop through. And one of the next visitors that they have is basically an art restorer. Someone had come by before this narrative happened. They had someone who came and collected a bunch of their old paintings to take them and clean them up and get them their luster back and make them, I don't know, just pretty again. Mm-hmm. It's an old manor house. There's fires burning everywhere, soot collects. So they've got these paintings that had been hard to see. And so he's coming back with all of this art that he's fixed up. Laura's mother was from an old Hungarian family, and most of the pictures had come to them through her. So they're going through all the pictures. There was one specifically that the father was looking for. He's like, oh, I haven't seen this one come out yet. And one corner at the top of it is the name, as well as I could read Marcia Karnstein and the date 1698. I'm curious to see how it turned out. Turns out Laura's mom was a descendant of the Karnsteins and from that abandoned village.
Oh.
So that's why that name was on this picture. The artist now produced it with evident pride. It was quite beautiful and startling. It seemed to live. And it was the effigy of Carmilla.
Oh.
Shockingly.
Huh.
Yeah. And none of them are like, oh, that's fucking weird. They're just like, oh my God, what a crazy coincidence. Carmilla, this picture looks just like you and it's so pretty. Oh my God, Daddy, can I hang it in my room? Oh, it's so nice.
Again, I realize that they are creating the genre, but fancy that.
Yeah.
A 200-year-old painting that looks just like the mysterious young lady who hates Jesus and doesn't eat, and all the peasant ladies are dying.
It's really something else. It's just... And at this point, the dad is starting to be like, it just says, my father laughed and said, certainly it is a wonderful likeness, but he looked away and to my surprise seemed but a little struck by it.
Dad is
slightly coincidentally odd.
Dad is finally getting a single clue.
Yeah.
Which I feel like, based on everything that came after, is the sign that bodies are about to start piling up.
Yes, I'm going to remind you of a few things previously in the narrative. One of the Karnstein Chateau Manor is that abandoned village a little bit to the west. All we know about Carmilla's origins is that she is from the west.
And came falling out of a carriage.
Just throwing that in there, just for reference. So the name in the corner didn't actually say Marcia. It said Mircalla, Mircalla. Countess Karnstein, 1698. And Laura's like, oh, I'm descended from the Karnstein. So that is my mom was.
Oh, and then, wait, does that make this... That makes this kind of incestuous, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. The face you're making. Allow me to remind you that this is an audio medium and no one can see the face that you're making right now.
There were some raised eyebrows. There was some pointed staring.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to jump ahead.
Nope, you're good. Laura's talking about how she's descended matrilineally. Oh my God. Matrilineally. The syllables didn't want to come out of my mouth. But yes, so she's a descendant of the Karnsteins. Carmilla replies, ah, said the lady languidly, so am I. I think a very long descent, very ancient. Are there any Karnsteins living now? The family name has been lost. Laura isn't technically a Karnstein anymore because she has her father's name, which I think is it's like Vodenberg, something like that. Very Germanic sounding again. And they're talking about how the family is ruined. The ruins of the castle are only about 3 miles to the west. And she's like, oh, fascinating. But see what beautiful moonlight. Just quickly is like, change of subject. Let's go for a walk. The mood is so pretty tonight.
Anyway,
aren't you glad I'm here? La 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 la. She's like, I'm delighted. And she's like, oh, and you asked for the picture you think like me to hang in your room, she murmured with a sigh as she drew her arm closer about my waist and let her pretty head sink upon my shoulder. And then I have just a little note in my book, more love.
Just like, you really think I'm pretty?
It's almost exactly what she says. Oh, darling, darling, she murmured, I live in you and you would die for me. I love you so.
Oh my God.
Cash friends. Cash.
Besties.
Yeah. So that night, Laura has a nightmare of a large black cat-like animal come into her room, followed by the appearance of a woman standing at the foot of her bed.
Oh.
Carmilla the next morning recounts similar dreams. Throughout this time, Laura is starting to feel herself kind of succumbing to this strange illness that she keeps hearing about, like the local peasants have befallen. Although not as sick, or not as quick, not as terrible, and she's not telling anyone. She keeps having bad dreams. There's some very like sensual aspects to some of these dreams.
It was a bad and horrible nightmare. I was having so much sex with a beautiful woman.
Yeah, and obviously it's not that obvious. And one of the things she says in here about her sickness, a strange melancholy was stealing over me, a melancholy I would not have interrupted. Dim thoughts of death began to open, and an idea that I was slowly declining took gentle and somehow not unwelcome possession of me. If it was sad, the state of mind it induced was also sweet. Whatever it was, my soul acquiesced to it.
Ooh,
I would not admit that I was ill, and I would not consent to tell my papa or to have the doctor sent for me. Carmilla is getting more devoted, her strange paroxysms of languid adoration more frequent. Carmilla's having crazy dreams.
Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. After all these, she's having all these dreams. She's hearing a woman's voice. Sometimes there came a sensation as if a hand was drawn softly along my cheek and neck. Sometimes it was as if warm lips kissed me, longer and longer and more lovingly as they reached my throat. And there the caress fixed itself. My heart beat faster, my breathing rose and fell rapidly. Then came a sobbing that rose into a sense of strangulation and turned into a dreadful convulsion, in which my senses left me and I became unconscious. And the footnote here from Carmen Maria Machado is, if this isn't an orgasm, nothing is.
She beat me to it. I was like, that, I know what that is.
Yeah, we all know what that is. Yeah.
Also, like, I have read enough Victorian literature. Like, that's, yep. So she finally gets to come.
Yeah. Although she's like, what is this? And then little bit later, she has another nightmare. She sees Carmilla drenched in blood at the foot of her bed and wakes up in a panic and calls for help. She's like absolutely freaking out. Oh my God, Carmilla's been murdered or whatever. So she goes like bangs on Carmilla's door. No answer. She's absolutely losing her shit. Mademoiselle and Madame hear this freaking out. They're trying to get into Carmilla's door. No answer. So they get some unnamed staff member of the house to come with a key to open the door. She is not in there. Everything has been locked from inside. Carmilla is nowhere to be found. They're all freaking out. Laura can't sleep the rest of the night, sits up with her governesses. The next day, they search everywhere. They're looking behind wardrobes. They are looking in the dress, like everywhere. Can't find her. And the next day, she like goes into Carmilla's room just to like look around, and she's just standing there casually. They're like, what the fuck?
I wonder where Carmilla could have been or what she was up to.
Yeah. And her dad is like, Carmilla, have you ever been a sleepwalker? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, easy explanation. You just sleptwalked. You pulled the key from the inside of your door. You walked out in your sleep, locked the door again behind you, wandered about, and then reopened the door and put yourself back in there. Perfectly logical explanation.
I'm imagining her dad as, the actor who played the original Barnaby in Midsummer Murders?
Yes.
I'm imagining her dad as him, but him in Poldark when he's playing that woman's very cheerful uncle who's just like, I'm a nice guy.
I haven't watched enough of Poldark to remember that, but I do know who you're talking about. And yeah, that tracks.
This is who I'm imagining every time he talks.
Yeah, he's a little bit bumbly, like, oh, there's an explanation for everything. But like, he's got that kind of optimism, but he's also like starting to have these little like just minor clicks in the head are starting to come together. So meanwhile, Laura is still she's having this weird illness. It's starting to become more evident on her face. Dark circles are coming out. Her dad has a doctor come in. The doctor talks privately with Laura and then privately with her father, who's now very concerned about Laura. She mentions to the doctor the sensation of being pricked on the breast and a feeling like the current of a cold stream running against her. Turns out she does, in fact, have 2 small prick marks on her chest along with a small bruise. The doctor and the father are both very tight-lipped with Laura about what they think might be going on and have a nurse set at her door at night just to, like, observe things. basically, don't you worry your pretty little head about that. We've got everything under control.
I love the unerring instinct to be like, no, you don't need to know what's wrong with you. It's fine.
He straight up, like, at one point tells her, like, I'm not going to tell you anything right now, but don't worry. In a couple of days, you'll know everything that I know, and it's all going to be fine.
Now go lie down, sweetie. Shh.
So they're kind of just like, we're just going to, like, put that on the back burner for now. Everything's fine. Hey, I got a letter from General Spielsdorf. You remember him? His daughter died. He's coming through town. We're going to hang out with him. So,
that seems like a good sign.
Yeah. So the general is coming back through town. Meanwhile, they had a plan. The dad wanted to go. He had business with a priest in the old Karnstein abandoned village. So like, we're just going to like take the carriage out there for the day. Mademoiselle will ride there with us. And then a little bit later, we're going to have a picnic. Carmilla and Madame will come out and meet us later for a picnic. But we're going to head out there now. They cross paths with the general's carriage on the way over to the old village. They knew he had been coming and they're like, why don't you just send your guys in your carriage onto the manor house? Why don't you just pop in the carriage with us? And he's like, oh, you're going to the old Karnstein place. Turns out I wanted to go check it out. What a weird coincidence. Yes, I'll just ride with you. So he tells them, you're going to the ruins of Karnstein? It is a lucky coincidence. Do you know I was going to ask you to bring me there to inspect them? I have a special object I'm interested in exploring. There is a ruined chapel, isn't there, with a great many tombs of that extinct family? Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh, yeah, fascinating. LOL, I hope you're thinking of claiming the title and estates. Just kind of like gaily laughing. Mm-hmm. I mean to unearth some of those... Oh, something very different, he said gruffly. I mean to unearth some of those fine people. I hope, by God's blessing, to accomplish a pious sacrilege here, which will relieve our earth of certain monsters and enable honest people to sleep in their beds without being assailed by murderers. I have strange things to tell you, my dear friend, things that I would have myself doubted a few months ago.
Whoop, there we go.
So he goes into the explanation of Bertha's death. He had brought Bertha to this lavish masquerade ball at some extremely wealthy. He's like, we got money, but these people got money. He was like, it was lavish. It was an insane masquerade ball. We're chilling. We're hanging out. There's people in masks everywhere. Everyone is like to the nines.
They're all doing cocaine and looking great.
Oh, yeah. Some eyes wide shut shit. We are like getting into it. And
he's like, but that wasn't the problem, shockingly enough.
Yes. And so keep in mind, this is all like maybe 10 months prior to everything that had been going on in the current timeline. So they're at this masquerade ball and there's this gorgeous, like highly stationed woman, like draped in black velvet with a full mask on. So you can't see her face. And she's got this beautiful young woman with her, also fully masked up, who immediately goes and befriends the general and Bertha. The young woman and Bertha, like just hitting it off, like having great conversations. The woman and the general are like having all this great conversation. And she keeps alluding to the fact that they know each other and they've met before. But he's like, I cannot figure out who the hell this is. Like, she says she knows me. She's like giving me details that like clearly she knows who I am. But I just like cannot for the life of me place her. And he's like, take off your mask. And she's like, oh, no. It's a secret. And she's like, I'll let you know eventually. And then in the midst of all of this conversation, and the girls are like absolutely hitting it off, having a grand old time, this very dramatic man in a cape comes up to pull the lady in away. Is like, I have to talk to you. So they scurry off and go chat for a minute. And she comes back and she's like, oh, General, I am so sorry. I have been called away on an urgent family matter. It must be taken of post haste. Can you watch my daughter for me? And at this pretty much exact moment, Bertha comes up and is like, oh my God, Dad, we are best friends. Can she stay with us for a while, please? Like, it would be so much fun. And he's just like, Can I keep her? Yeah. And he's like, I mean, okay, like, sure.
I really want some parent out here. I just want you to try ambushing a stranger sometime soon and be like, hey, do you just want my kid for like a little bit?
And he's just like, I mean, she's beautiful and charming. So like, yeah, we'll take her. My daughter's friends with her. She seems great. You're fascinating. I'm intrigued. Would love to hear more. Yes, we'll watch your daughter for a little while. She's like, max like 3 months. Which, funnily enough, the lady in the carriage is basically what they said to Laura and her father. I swear it's only going to be like 3 months. Just totally fine.
It's fine. It's not even a full quarter. Look, you're hot. She's hot. Put the kid in the car. It's fine.
Yeah. On they go. And she's whisked away into her fancy carriage by the man in the dramatic cape. Mask never revealed. He never sees her face. And he's like, who was she? I am so curious. Anyways, come home with me, strange lady.
I couldn't possibly ask her daughter to elucidate.
And then, shockingly enough, Bertha takes a turn. She is at first visited by appalling dreams. And then, as she fancied by a specter, sometimes resembling... Oh, I think I forgot to mention this. But the daughter, he never gets the mom's name. But so far we have Carmilla, who is staying with Laura. And then we have Mircalla, who is the painting that they find. This girl's name is Millarca, Millarca.
Anagram much?
So Bertha is having these health issues. She's having anxiety. She's having all these crazy dreams, sometimes in the shape of a black cat-like beast, sometimes resembling Millarca. Last came the sensations. One not unpleasant but very peculiar, she said, resembled the flow of an icy stream against her breast. At later times, she felt something like a pair of large needles pierce her painfully a little below the throat. A few nights after there followed a gradual and convulsive sense of strangulation, then came unconsciousness.
Oh, no.
So Laura's like, you may guess how strangely I felt to hear my own symptoms described so exactly in those which had been experienced by the poor girl who, but for the catastrophe which followed, would have been at that moment a visitor at my father's chateau. You may suppose also how I felt as I heard him detail habits and mysterious peculiarities, which were, in fact, those of our beautiful guest, Carmilla. So this is the point Yeah, yep. This is the point at which they come to a clearing in the woods. They have arrived at the village. They're in front of the chapel and the chateau of the Karnsteins. And they hear like there's a woodsman who lives in the area and has been there for ages. And he's just kind of doing his thing. And they hear him. And I hear the axe of a woodman, the general said, busy among the trees that surround it. He possibly may give us the information of which I am in search and point out the grave of Mircalla, Countess of Karnstein. These rustics preserve the local tradition of great families whose stories die out among the rich and entitled so soon as the families themselves become extinct. The father's like, we have a portrait at home of Mircalla. Do you want to see it?
He's like, oh my God, that's so weird.
Crazy. And the general's like, in time, friend, in time.
General's like, I am 63 steps ahead of you.
He's like, I believe that I have seen the original, and one motive which has led me to you earlier than I at first intended was to explore the chapel we are now approaching. And he's like, what? See the countess? She's dead. He's like, no, she's
like,
not.
He's like, want to bet?
And he's like, I will seek vengeance.
Vengeance is mine.
I will decapitate the monster, he answered with a fierce flush and a stomp that echoed mournfully through the hollow ruin.
Oh my.
And Tat, what? Exclaimed my father, more than ever bewildered. To strike her head off. Cut her head off? This goes on for a minute.
I really love how slow on the uptake the dad is. He is just so many steps behind at all times.
He is so confused. He has no idea what's going on. So they're in the old the ruins of the chateau talking to this woodsman. And
let me guess. He's like, oh, the vampire? Yeah, I know which one.
Yes, precisely. The general's like, how come the village is deserted? He's like, oh, it was troubled by revenants, which is old-timey, the undead. Several were tracked to their graves and extinguished in the usual ways, by decapitation, by the stake, and by burning, but not until many of the villagers were killed. But even after all those proceedings, with so many graves opened and so many vampires deprived of their horrible animation, the village was not relieved. And then he goes into how a Moravian nobleman who happened to be traveling this way was skilled in such affairs, as many people are in his country, and offered to deliver the villagers from its torment. So he did. And Moravia is a historical country that occupied what is now the easternmost portion of the Czech Republic. So he's like from nearby, but supposedly a lot of vampires in that area.
Oh, okay. Got a real vampire problem in Moravia.
Yeah, the way they described him and everything, I was like, is this who Van Helsing was based on? Who I know was a character in Dracula, but again, this is 17 years prior, and I was like, fascinating. So he's like on the hunt for vampires. The stranger, having seen all of this drama, came down from the steeple, took the linen wrappings of the vampire and carried them to the top of the tower, which he again mounted. He basically like stole the vampire's clothes, lured the vampire up to the summit of the tower he was hiding in, invited him in so the vampire could come in. This is the first time we've seen of the vampire has to be invited into the threshold to be able to enter, which I just thought was fascinating. So the vampire's like, hell yeah, he invited me in. And the Moravian chopped his head off and then burned him. But at this point, the town was done.
It was too late.
It was too late. Everyone's been dead.
There are only so many vampire murders a town can withstand.
They hide the tomb of Mircalla, and no one really knows where it is anymore. So they're here to look for Mircalla's grave.
So she's the last vampire.
Supposedly.
At least in this particular tomb complex.
Yeah. The general is kind of still going in and recounting how Bertha dies, and he basically is told by a priest that it's a vampire that's doing this. And he's like, that sounds crazy. But into what quackeries will not people rush for a last chance where all accustomed means have failed and the life of a loved one is at stake?
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing people do in the real world all the time.
Yeah, frankly, he's the most sensible person in this book.
He does seem like it.
He's pissed. But yeah, I mean, he's the most sensible one. So they've kind of put Laura off to the side. They're like, go sit on this bench here. We're going to go figure everything out. And she's just like, okay, whatever. Like, fine. You guys do what you're doing. So she's just like hanging off on the sidelines while these guys are like plotting and like talking to these guys who have some weird like hand-drawn map of where the tomb might be.
Love to be left alone while the men are monster hunting.
Yes. So in the midst of all of this, I would like you to remember who was supposed to become meeting them for a picnic at the abandoned chateau.
What? I mean, look, whomst among us has not accidentally invited the vampire on our vampire hunt?
You know,
who can say?
Or, I mean, you've got vampires as friends and you've invited the vampire hunter. It's a little like Guillermo from What We Do in the Shadows here.
It's just a little awkward.
Just a little awkward. It's like, oh no.
A bit gauche. That's a real social faux pas for Laura there. And then Carmilla waltzes onto the scene.
Having just listened to so strange a story in this solitude, connected as it was with the great entitled dead whose monuments mouldered among the dust and ivy round us, and with every incident that matched my own mysterious case, a horror had begun to steal over me. I heard the voices of Carmilla and Madame, who were at that moment approaching. In this haunted spot, darkened by the towering foliage that rose on every side, dense and high above its noiseless walls, my heart sank as I thought that my friends were about to enter and disturb this sorrowful and ominous scene.
What?
And then she looks over, and I saw the beautiful face and figure of Carmilla enter the shadowy chapel.
And I 100% refused to put two and two together.
Oh man, the levels of just mental gymnastics here. So she walks in, Carmilla walks in, sees the woodsman hatchet, sees the general. On seeing him, a brutal change came over her features. It was an instantaneous and horrible transformation. She made a crouching step backwards. Woodsman goes after her with an axe.
Good for him.
Yeah,
the only
I'm gonna fuck this bitch up right now.
The only person in the story who is having the appropriate and immediate response.
Yeah, immediately is like axe to the face. He misses. She disappears.
I just can't get over that Laura's like, man, that was a really crazy story about a girl getting like absolutely murdered by her hot best friend. That couldn't happen to me, though. I'm different.
Couldn't be me.
I'm built different.
Meanwhile, Madame is just confused. The first thing I recollect afterward is Madame standing before me, impatiently repeating again and again, where is Carmilla? And she's like, I don't know. She went that way. And she's like, but I was standing there. She didn't go that way. And everyone is like, where did she go? The general's like, she called herself Carmilla? He said, aye, that is Miyarka. That is the same person who long ago was called Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Depart from this accursed ground, my poor child, as quickly as you can. Drive to the clergyman's house and stay there till we come. Be gone. May you never behold Carmilla more. You will not find her here.
The general is the only person in this book who can work out basic anagrams.
Yeah, bruh. Yeah. It's like so weird that we have this exact portrait that's 200 years old of the same person with almost the same name with the exact letters in it. Like, so strange. They finally figure it out. They find the long lost monument of Mircalla. So they pull it out. They open the tomb. Carmilla is still missing. No one can find her. Yeah. So they're like, okay, Laura, you need to leave. We're sending a priest with you. It's time for you to go home. She is not left alone. She is like, what? They're keeping an eye on you. There's a priest nearby. Your ladies are nearby. We are not leaving you alone. I saw all clearly a few days later the disappearance of Carmilla was followed by the discontinuance of my nightly sufferings. Again, shocking. They end up finding the tomb. They open it up. Carmilla is in the coffin. Her features, though 150 years had passed since her funeral, were tinted with the warmth of life. Her eyes were open. No cadaverous smell exhaled from the coffin. So I guess they go and open it at the time, which she's usually like still in bed.
Still in bed. Heavy quotes.
They left the chapel when all that happened, went home, regrouped, called some people in. They went back to do like a formal inquiry and brought like priests and all that with them. Blah, blah, blah. The other on the part of the promoter of the inquiry attested to the marvelous fact that there was a faint but appreciable respiration and a corresponding action of the heart. The limbs were perfectly flexible, the flesh elastic, and the leaden coffin filled with blood to a depth of 7 inches in which the body lay immersed.
Oh!
Yep.
Whoa!
Yep.
That was not a detail I expected.
Yeah, I was surprised by that one too. So they drive a stake into her heart. It uttered a piercing shriek at that moment, in all respects such as might escape from a living person in the last agony. Then the head was struck off and a torrent of blood flowed from the severed neck. The body and head were next placed on a pile of wood and reduced to ashes, which were thrown upon the river and borne away. And that territory has never since been plagued by the visits of a vampire.
Whoa.
Yep. And she wasn't present for this. His dad, like, they brought a bunch of people. There was like an official record put together of this event. And she's like, and that's how I learned about the end of Carmilla, was I read my father's record. So that's the end of, there's a few page conclusion for Laura. She's like, I write all this, you suppose, with composure, but far from it, I cannot think of it without agitation. So she's still, it's been, 10 years later, and she still is shook.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, so it turns out that the Moravian nobleman they were talking about before, he was in truth a native of Upper Styria. It is enough to say that in very early youth, he had been a passionate and favored lover of the beautiful Mircalla, Countess Karnstein. Her early death plunged him into inconsolable grief. It is the nature of vampires to increase and multiply, but according to an ascertained and ghostly law.
Oh, wait.
So I guess he was in love with her before the vampirism happened.
Right.
And then I guess she got turned into a vampire and he's like fucked up about it. So this is, assume it's starting a territory perfectly free from that pest. How does it begin and how does it multiply itself? I will tell you. A person more or less wicked puts an end to himself. A suicide under certain circumstances becomes a vampire. That specter visits living people in their slumbers. They die and almost invariably in the grave they develop into vampires. This happened in the case of the beautiful Mircalla, who was haunted by one of those demons. My ancestor, and this is the guy who had the map, my ancestor of Wardenburg, whose title I still bear, soon discovered this, and in the course of the studies to which he devoted himself, learned a great deal more. Among other things, he concluded that suspicion of vampirism would probably fall sooner or later upon the dead countess, who in life had been his idol. He conceived a horror, be she what she might, of her remains being profaned by the outrage of a posthumous execution. He has left a curious paper to prove that the vampire, on expulsion from its amphibious existence, is projected into a far more horrible life, and he resolved to save his once beloved Mircalla from this.
Oh.
His lady died. She got turned into a vampire. He knew that vampires, once like staked, burned, all that, went into like the depths of hell, and he like didn't want her to be exhumed.
Aw.
But in the course of that, he hid her tomb so no one could find it, and then she turned into a vampire and killed a bunch of people.
Well, yeah, but now I'm kind of on his side.
I mean, yeah, I don't blame him. Yeah, and then so he made the tracings and notes, which have guided me to the very spot, and drew up a confession of the deception that he had practiced. If he had intended any further action on this matter, death prevented him, and the hand of a remote descendant has, too late for many, directed the pursuit to the lair of the beast. So that's it. She's like, sometimes I start from a reverie, certain I heard the light step of Carmilla at the drawing room door. The end.
Well, dang. That's the story of Carmilla.
That's the story of Carmilla.
That's, there's a lot happening there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to discuss it with you at length in our next episode. But at first blush, it was hornier than I expected.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was going to be a lot more nuanced.
No, there's very little nuance in here.
And I am struck by the fact that we get so little of Carmilla as a character,
mm-hmm,
rather than as just a sort of monster.
Yeah.
Which, makes sense for like the time. And again, like I know I've said it a million times already, but like it's the birth of a genre, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like even by the time we get to Dracula himself is given a little bit more page time.
Yeah.
In terms of nowhere near as much as they wind up putting into like later riffs on it and adaptations of it.
Right.
But Dracula has a little bit more stuff going on.
Yeah, because he's definitely more of a, I don't want to say fleshed out per se, but he is more of a character in that. Like Carmilla is just a beautiful, full of kisses, hot girl that's just staying there, and like you really don't see many things from her perspective at all. It's all just like Laura recounting everything, and like she's not really given, well, I was gonna say she's not really given much of a personality, but she is just the monster.
Hot predatory lesbian.
Yeah.
I would like a hot predatory lesbian, please and thank you.
Yep.
Send me one. I'll get eaten. It's fine. I deserve it.
Well, I know what to get you for Christmas this year.
Can't wait.
Yep.
Well, is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap this up? and get together again next week?
No, we'll save the rest for getting into it next time.
All right. Well, thank you again for sharing. Can't wait to talk about it more.
Yes.
And all of you out there, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you. And as always, if you can this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author. Because they could really use the help. Bye.
Bye.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kaylee Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at didn'treaditpod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pescatrio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
Our closing music for this episode is The Witch Lair by Adam Saban, because it's spooky.